The Detroit Regional Chamber's MPC20 Conversations Respond and Rebuild digital series is provided in partnership with Detroit Public Television and presented by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, with additional support from Accenture, Bank of America, Barton Mallow, Comerica Bank, Consumers Energy, Delta Dental, Dow, DTE Energy, Enbridge Energy, Ford Motor Company, Huntington Bank, ITC, KPMG, the Kresge Foundation, Kroger, Michigan Economic Development Corporation, PNC Bank, Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation, Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans, the Skillman Foundation, and TCF Bank. And by these supporters. Support for Detroit Public TV's coverage is provided by DTE Energy Foundation and Masco.
Welcome to MPC20 Conversations, the Detroit Regional Chamber's 2020 Mackinac Policy Conference digital series. Like so many others, the Chamber pivoted in light of the COVID crisis and moved our traditional gathering of CEOs and elected officials at Mackinac Island's Grand Hotel to this virtual forum. Thanks for joining us for these important conversations and for supporting us during these unprecedented times. On behalf of the Chamber, I would like to thank Detroit Public Television and our many long-term corporate and philanthropic partners. Their support provides the Chamber the ability to continue to bring critical conversations to you in this modified form. Today's discussion is one near and dear to my heart and to the Chamber's mission: civility. The Chamber has made civility a core theme over the years. We have stressed the need for civility in our public discourse for the last several years, including using our premier convening and communications platforms, such as the Mackinac Policy Conference, the Detroit Policy Conference, our Detroiter magazine, and other outreach tools to stress the need for civility as our state and nation deal with the complex issues that confront us. Today's public discourse is not just unpleasant, it damages the fabric of our society. Today's conversational currency is one of yelling, entrenchment, and demonizing. While this is certainly found in our politics, these traits have penetrated our everyday lives. Just look at much of our news media and certainly our social media. These traits of yelling, entrenchment, and demonizing are directly at odds with advancing understanding, democratic compromise, and the ability to address the nation's challenges and opportunities. I'm sure you share my thought that I'm far less inclined to listen and work with someone who is yelling and demonizing me. With my friends Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson, we have been working both collectively and individually to advance the ethos of a more civil conversation, using everything from our public profiles, the reach of our organizations, and even a bottle of bourbon to advance the cause of civility in our public discourse. On behalf of the Detroit Regional Chamber, I am proud to feature Nolan and Stephen today on MPC20 Conversations. Thanks so much for joining us.
We are living in challenging times. Politics is polarizing. Racism is rampant. The pandemic is frightening, and families are divided. Tough times require more dialogue and more understanding. But navigating our differences constructively is hard work. Delta Dental believes that healthy, smart, vibrant communities are also civil and harmonious. They are places where disagreement does not have to be toxic or destructive. Civility starts with listening. Welcome to the Civility Project.
Thanks to the Chamber, thanks to Delta Dental Plans of Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana for making the Great Lakes Civility Project possible. And thanks for all of you for joining us today. Well, a year ago, when Steve and I were first shaping this Civility Project and trying to figure out what we wanted to do next with it, we had a very strong suspicion that 2020 was going to be a pretty rough year on civility. We had no idea what was ahead for us. And we feel very fortunate that through technology, through Zoom, that we've been able to move these sessions out of the bar rooms and out of the group setting and onto Zoom and other platforms to continue talking to people about civility through this very trying year. It's worked out well. We have talked to thousands of people. We've engaged a lot of people in conversations, and we're going to continue to do so. We don't expect that the election is going to end this great divide in Michigan, and that we'll have a lot to talk about next year. Steve and I began this really in earnest a few years ago when we did a StoryCorps session talking about how two people who really disagree so passionately on so many things could remain fast friends. And it started us thinking as we talked about how that was possible. And I guess the basic answer, and we'll get into that in just a minute, is that we took the time to try to understand each other and to build some trust before we started slugging it out in conversations. We got to know the values that we each use to shape our opinion. And we started formalizing that in sessions where we ask other people to sit down and do that. Anybody who watches on television, sees us on DPTV or Flashpoint, knows that we can get pretty passionate, if you will, and we can get angry. And that's sort of not what we're trying to talk to people about in terms of avoiding the passion and avoiding even the anger. What we're trying to talk to people about, teach people, is that you can have those kind of very fierce, strong discussions and still maintain your friendship. It takes a lot of work, but it's worth it.
In some ways, there is every reason to be concerned about this issue right now, and there is also a reason to say maybe this is not so important right now. I mean, the pandemic, the massive protests, the massive movement that has grown up around Black Lives Matter, against systemic racism and police brutality. I mean, these are very confrontational issues. These are issues that strike at everybody's core. People are afraid, people are angry, people are frustrated, and so it's at once the moment when people are least likely to embrace the idea of civility, but also the moment when you most need people to be able to talk to one another and to be able to have these exchanges. And so, what our goal has been from the beginning has really been about trying to make it clear to people that despite your differences, despite the feelings that you have, despite the deep passion that you might have about the things that are going on, it is possible in your world, it is possible in the spaces where you interact with the people who you know, to build a better dialogue, to build the ability to be able to have these disagreements, to be able to have passionate debates and arguments, even to have fights, verbal fights, of course, without devolving to the point where you're belittling somebody, where you are walking away from that debate, without demonizing somebody, without all of the things that we see that are happening that are preventing us from having the constructive conversation that will actually lead to solutions. It's a really fine line to walk, and it's a finer line this year, I think, than it has been in even recent years. This idea that all of the anger that people have, all of the frustration that they have, is legitimate and has a place in the exchanges, but that civility, the ability to exchange those ideas in a productive manner, also has space. There is space for that as well, and it's important space as we move out of crisis and kind of toward solution making, as we really start to think about what kind of country do we want to have, what kind of culture do we want to have, and in order to do that, you've got to be able to talk to people who you don't agree with.
And the practical question is, how long can we live this divided? I mean, how can we live as one country and be this angry at one another, and to not understand each other to the level that it exists today? The lack of understanding, the lack of a willingness to dialogue and to reach some sort of understanding, very low. I mean, we started this with the StoryCorps, and what that taught us is that most people come to their opinions the same way. They take their values, they take the data and information and apply their values and experiences to it and form an opinion. And if they form an opinion that is different from yours, it doesn't necessarily make them evil or ignorant or bad Americans. It doesn't, it isn't cause to hate someone for their opinion, but it's, before you can have that productive discussion, you need to have that understanding, and you have to enter the discussions with, in an honest manner. You've got to be willing to listen. And one of the first steps in having a civil conversation is, to shut up for a while and listen to what the person you're talking with has to say.
Yeah. We talk about kind of core principles of what a civil exchange looks like. And the very first principle that we always kind of start with is listening, the art of listening, the idea of not just not talking when someone else is talking. I mean, I think for a lot of us, that is what defines listening, the idea that somehow I'm not talking, so I must be listening to you. But oftentimes, and this is something that I find myself guilty of from time to time as well, I'm not talking, but I'm actually not listening that much to the other person, because I'm in my head. I'm thinking about what the next thing I might say will be. I'm thinking about the person who's talking and maybe judging what they're saying, as opposed to really trying to understand what it is that they're trying to articulate. There is a practice that you have to kind of go through that says, I am listening to this other person, and I am listening with an open mind. I am listening without judgment to what that person is saying, so that I might better understand why they think what they think, as opposed to reacting to what they're saying or what they think. And that's very hard. Think of all the things in our culture right now that discourage that kind of listening, that kind of active listening. The cable news 24-hour cycle. If you watch CNN or Fox or MSNBC, you notice that what they feature is shouting. What they feature are people who aren't listening to one another, and who are doubling down over and over again on their point of view and their perspective, trying to win points, in fact, by maybe embarrassing or insulting the other person. Social media is another platform that really does discourage the idea of listening to each other. What's the most prominent feature on Facebook or on Twitter? It's the mute button or the block button, or the ability to silence people whom you don't agree with. In order to actively listen, you really have to kind of take yourself out of that culture. You have to take yourself out of those practices and start to try to relate to the people you're talking to in a really different way. Another principle that we talk about all the time with civility is that idea of staying in the conversation beyond the immediate moment. The idea that you can get up and walk away from somebody that you disagree with and say, I'm done with that person. I'm not going to have this conversation anymore. I don't think that person. I don't think that person's worth the time to be able to talk to about these things. I think it makes sense to do that when you're talking about exchanges on a national level or beyond what you can control. But when you're talking about people who when you're talking about people in your neighborhood or in your workplace or in your church or in your school, that kind of disengagement, that kind of disinvestment damages the ability to actually communicate and work toward solutions. And so committing to the idea that the relationship you have with the other person is actually more important than the exchange you might be having or the ideas that you might not see eye to eye on is really key. And that becomes difficult as well. The culture discourages that as well. Social media encourages us to push people out of our circles who don't do the things or say the things that we want them to. Cable news encourages people to think of other people as unacceptable or outside the circle that they're in. We're saying that in the spaces where you live all the time, there's an opportunity to do it differently. There's an opportunity to reach out and actually connect with somebody in a way that goes beyond these disagreements and to then have the disagreements without the threat to the relationship.
Yeah, I'll just build on that, Steve, and say that a conversation is not a competition. As you mentioned, you're not there to score points. You're not there to win. If we had approached our conversations over the years, both in public and private, with the idea that one of us is going to win and walk away a victor in the conversation, we'd have been done a long time ago. Set honest goals for the conversation. If you're setting out to preach and lecture, you need to take a step back and start over, because nobody's going to listen to that, as Sandy said in his opening remarks. If you're there to convert, give it up. You're not going to convert somebody. I'm never going to convert Steve, and he's not going to convert me, but that's not what it's all about. We set an honest goal for our conversations, and that is to have a civil exchange of ideas in which we each might learn something. I always approach any opinion-making process with the idea that my assumptions might be wrong, that I might be wrong, and that I could learn something. And I do learn something in my conversations with Steve. They don't often change my opinion, but they add layers to it, and they help me understand where the other side is coming from, and they also help me hone and sharpen my own views. And there's usefulness in that. So set an honest goal for the conversation that you're trying to learn. You're trying to broaden your own area of knowledge, and be open to learning something from the other person. You have to have the trust. You have to be comfortable expressing your views and willing to listen to the other person's views. But just keep in mind, you're not out to win anything in this process.
Yeah. Nolan was just talking about that idea of building a relationship first, and the idea of building that relationship in a way that gives you a better idea of where the other person is coming from. And he mentioned earlier that we went down and did a StoryCorps episode together when StoryCorps was here in Detroit. And that was the purpose of that exercise. Nolan and I at that point had been friends and had done work together for about 10 years. But we had never sat down and actually talked about why we believed the things that we believed. where do those ideas come from? And so I thought StoryCorps, which is an effort to collect memories of interactions between Americans, memories and memorials really of relationships. I thought it would be a really interesting opportunity for us to talk about how the things that we do together work in the context of profound disagreement. But I didn't want us to go and talk about those disagreements. I didn't want us to go and sort of focus in on what my view is or what his view is. So instead, we went and talked about where we were from. We talked about what our early lives were like and what influences we drew from in order to form the opinions that we have now. And a couple things I think were really clear after that conversation. Number one, we both knew more about the other than we did before. As I said, we'd known each other about 10 years. There were things that we both didn't know before that conversation about where the other was from or where the ideas that the other one has come from. But the other thing that was really revelatory, I think, for both of us was the commonalities. That despite the fact that we see things really differently and from opposite sides, really, of the political spectrum, there are lots of things that we share in terms of our backgrounds, in terms of how we come to the views that we come to, and I think that understanding, that insight into somebody's personality, into somebody's inner workings, the way that they come up with the ideas that they do, is really critical to being able to have that civil discourse. It minimizes the importance of the differences and maximizes the importance of the similarities or the relatable points. And not enough of us, I think, have the opportunity to do that, or take the opportunity to do that with people that we don't agree with. And the point of the project really is to give people that opportunity to say, here's a chance to talk with somebody, not just about politics or culture or the things that you disagree with, but to really discuss who you are and really discuss where you come from, and hope that the other person, just like you, sees value in that story, sees value in that journey, and that becomes kind of a protective barrier around the exchange, around the interactions, that overcomes the passion or the anger or the frustration that naturally gets expressed in political debates.
The other thing we discovered, and it became very clear in that discussion, was that in many cases, if not most cases, we want the same outcome. We want to get to the same place. We want a fairer, more prosperous society. We want a better life for our community, and we want our community to thrive. It's the outcome we rarely disagree with. It's the path and process of getting there, the different approaches, and that's something you can have a productive conversation about. Another thing I would add is this. As Steve talked, social media has made it so easy for us to hate one another. And, a technology that was supposed to connect us has actually driven us apart. And, I would add here that you can hate ideas, you can hate, an ideology. Don't hate individuals. And I just tell this story often. We were on Mackinac, Steve and I were probably 10 years ago, and he was up there as I was covering the Republican State Convention. And as you can imagine, it wasn't that comfortable a place for him, but we were having a big time. We were at a bar after the sessions, and I stepped away for a second, and these two very conservative ladies, pounced on me and said, "Oh, how can you be sitting there talking with Steve Henderson? We just hate him. And I said, you hate him? I said, have you met him? No, no. I said, you've never talked to him? No. I said, well, how do you know you hate him? Well, we just hate him. We hated what he writes. We hate what he says. I said, I'll tell you what, go over there and talk to him a few minutes and then see if you still hate him. It was 2 hours later. I'm dragging them away from Steve, and they're like, oh, he's so charming. He's so wonderful. Now, Steve's ideas hadn't changed and his positions hadn't changed, but they had taken the time to see him as a person, as an individual, as a human being, and not just about his politics. And it's important for us, and at the risk of sounding like a Sunday school lesson here, it's very important for us to stay away from hate, to disagree without hating, because that sort of hate we're seeing in our world today leads to dehumanization. And we've seen throughout history what dehumanization leads to and what it makes people capable of doing to one another. And so, and if you find yourself watching a TV show or reading something, say, oh, I just hate that person, stop right there and say, I hate what he's saying. I hate what he's writing or what she's saying and writing. But you don't hate a person you don't know and you haven't taken the time to get to know as an individual.
Yeah. I talked a little earlier about this year and this time and how difficult all of these concepts are in the middle of this. And I kind of want to go back to that a little bit to talk about how you deal with civility in the face of what you see as oppression or dismissal of your rights. The Black Lives Matter movement is about saying that this is enough, that Black and brown people have been treated as lesser than, have been brutalized and dismissed for the entire history of this country, and that we're not going to do that anymore. And that message alone invites confrontation. That message alone sort of encapsulates the idea of pushing back or of pushing over institutions that continue to embrace systemic inequality. And civility doesn't ask us. It doesn't ask us to step back from any of that. It doesn't ask us to accept the idea of the way things are, or not push for radical systemic change. What it does do is say that in the places that we can control, which are the interactions that we have with other people, that the best way to move to a better place, the best way to get to solutions is actually to have a genuine exchange. It is not to threaten or to dismiss the other side. It's to help convince the other side that the changes that need to happen have to happen now. I can't think of a more difficult year to be able to do that than this year. And there have been times this year when I have said that, I'm not ready to have a civil exchange about some of the things that are going on, that the passion that I have, the anger that I feel is just too much. And that's okay. That's a part of civility too. The understanding that you're not ready to have a genuine and civil exchange about something that you just are angry about, and something that you can't really see what the other side is. But what I haven't done and what I won't do is say that that's my permanent position, that I won't have that exchange at all, that I won't engage in the dialogue at all with people who see it differently. And again, the impetus behind that is the idea that in order to move forward, we do have to move forward together. And it's a really hard concept right now in a lot of ways. But, the solutions that we need, the solutions that we want, have to come from a pretty big consensus of American minds. It has to be something that we do as a country, as a nation, as a culture. And in order to do that, you have to be ready to engage in some sort of civil exchange. That doesn't mean giving up your position. It doesn't mean letting the other side have more of what it wants or needs than you. But it does mean being able to talk about it and to argue about it without, again, getting up and walking away for good, or dismissing the other side as disingenuous or unworthy of that exchange. And I see a lot of opportunity coming up after our elections, after things with the pandemic are better in hand, for us to be able to have a much more substantive dialogue than we have had in many, many years about what the future looks like, about what America's going to be in 2021 or 2022. We've got to be able to talk about that. We've got to be able to field all of the ideas that are out there to come up with a way that makes things better, especially for people who are on the bitter end of the inequality that still defines our country now.
And there's a moment here. I think there is a general consensus and widespread recognition that this can't go on. We can't go on like we've been going on. What there isn't a whole lot of yet is any sort of clue of how we get to where we want to go, particularly for the people who are sort of new to supporting this cause. I think people are ready for protest to move to action, and you can't get from protest to action without honest, productive conversations. And those have to be conversations that happen in a atmosphere of trust. People have to know there's going to be no repercussions from an honest conversation and conversations that's aimed at improving understanding, because there are going to be times when people say the wrong things out of ignorance or lack of understanding. We've got to be able to talk without playing gotcha, and we've got to bring the conversation to places that people understand, or to levels that people understand. I mean, when you talk to, we're talking to a business audience today, and you're talking about inequality. Well, to me, inequality as a conservative, inequality and inequity and racism and this maintenance of a permanent underclass is an economic issue. It's bad for business. And so if you can find that place where people say, that's how it impacts me directly, I think you can start a more productive conversation. But you don't want everybody walking on eggshells. There has to be trust across the table.
There's this tremendous opportunity also for business leaders in particular to play a key role in facilitating the opportunity for these kinds of for these conversations. Of course, they can't force them, but the idea of inviting employees in your workplace, for instance, to lean into this idea of how to build civil relationships. I mean, so often in the workplace, the answer is, well, we're just not going to have any politics going on around here. We're not going to have people talking about these things that in their lives, when they're not at work, dominate their thoughts and their actions and everything else. That's not very realistic, especially right now. And so the idea of getting people together, not around the idea of talking about their differences, but talking about who they are, talking about where they come from, how they come up with the ideas that they have. Business leaders have a real chance to to convene people in those spaces. Workplaces are one of the spaces that we actually do have control over. We can control how we interact with the people at our place of business. We can control what those relationships look like. And as business leaders, I think there's not just the opportunity, but also the obligation to invite people in the workplace to start these dialogues again in a place that steps back from the idea of profound difference or anger or frustration, and says, let me tell you why I think this. Let me tell you about my life. Let me tell you about how I got to this place, so you understand a little better who I am, why I think the way I do, and the fact that I can respect your different background and experiences just as much as I'm asking you to respect mine.
You've got to bring people to that place where they're comfortable exchanging ideas and where they're encouraged to talk. Right now, I think you have a lot of folks saying, oh, yeah, Black Lives Matter, give me the bumper sticker. And whew, I took care of that. You have to push them into what next, that what next conversation, the tougher conversation. And that does require the sort of trust we're talking about, because most people don't have a clue what to do next. And if you allow people to just check a box and continue to harbor their old resentments, and you simply drive it underground, where it's going to fester and become an even uglier thing. You've got to bring all that up. And to get all that up, it's got to be in a no repercussions environment.
You can always join us at the Civility Project, the Great Lakes Civility Project, and we're always happy to come and talk with your employees or other groups about how we have done this and encourage them to do it. So, Nolan, thanks for being here with me today and talking about this.
Thanks you as always, Steve.
Yeah, and thank all of you for joining us for MPC20 Conversations.
Next year on Mackinac.
Next year on Mackinac, God willing, right?
The Detroit Regional Chamber's MPC20 Conversations Respond and Rebuild digital series is provided in partnership with Detroit Public Television and presented by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, with additional support from Accenture, Bank of America, Barton Mallow, Comerica Bank, Consumers Energy, Delta Dental, Dow, DTE Energy, Enbridge Energy, Ford Motor Company, Huntington Bank, ITC, KPMG, the Kresge Foundation, Kroger, Michigan Economic Development Corporation, PNC Bank, Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation, Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans, the Skillman Foundation, and TCF Bank. And by these supporters. Support for Detroit Public TV's coverage is provided by DTE Energy Foundation and Masco.